Alright, we're going to do just a little bit of web application testing. I imagine that there's an entire in-depth course, or maybe even two, for web application testing that I encourage you to go to next. We certainly can't cover everything, so we're just going to look at a little brief overview of some of the key points of web application testing and give you a foundation, if you will, for continued study of web application testing. To kind of give you an idea if maybe this is a field that you would like to spend a lot of time with. I find that most people have some area or maybe two areas that they spend most of their research time in. They're good enough at other areas, but since information security is so big, we generally have a specialty or two that we spend a good deal of our time becoming proficient and even moving that field forward through research. Alright, our test app for this is on your Windows 7 system. In the setup instructions, it tells you how to install this application. This is certainly not the only vulnerable web application. There are some that are publicly available online. I like one called Damn Vulnerable Webapp, which is freely available. So I'd encourage you to try that one next. OWASP, the Open Web Application Security Project, has one called WebGoat that actually has built-in learning exercises in it. That's a good one for beginners as well. And there's several others, so if you want to continue with websites, I encourage you to try some of those. They probably have a few more vulnerabilities than this one. This is just kind of a specific application that I actually inherited. It wasn't even mine originally, but it has a lot of the major issues in it. Alright, so it is at book service on your Windows 7 box, so it should look something like this. If you don't see the books and stuff, then the database isn't set up correctly, so a lot of what we're going to do isn't going to work. So go back and check your setup instructions until you can get it to look like this. It has install scripts and everything, so it should be pretty straightforward if you follow the instructions. If you're like me, you tend to skip steps, and sometimes things don't work. So what we're going to do here is we're mainly going to do manual analysis. I find that there's not really any products that do as good a job as I would like just doing vulnerability scanning for custom web applications, and that's just given the nature of custom web applications. Anybody can build an application, and it's really hard to make checks that'll check everything, regardless of what the content is. So we will look at some automated scanning, but mainly we'll do things manually. I do use some scanners that are expensive on some of my jobs. Things like Acunetics, WebInspect, things like that. I mean, just depending on what software my client that I'm working for has, generally, because those things are pretty pricey for the little tester like me. But I do use those just as a base and then do my manual testing from there. But I'm not going to have you download like Acunetics or anything. But if your company or school has products like that, I encourage you to get familiar with them. We're going to use my favorite proxy called Burp Suite. And that's not good. How about Java Burp Suite? Exception in main. That is going to kill everything. Because without the proxy, we're not going to get very far at all. And we're not actually going to have a web application section, probably. Java burp suite.jar. Locate burp suite. That's what I get for changing VMs. Something's going to change. Well, actually, if I think about it, this was probably true in the old version of Kali as well. So let me try one more thing. So I feel like the old version of Kali had the same issue. I use Burp Suite Pro that I pay for. That's actually directly on my Mac. They have a free version on here. So we go to Applications in Kali Linux, Web Applications, Web Application Proxies, and click on Burp Suite. Yeah, that'll do it. I just forgot that. Again, I use the one that's Pro. I just click I accept, and this should load it up. There we go. Alright, cool. So we have our Burp Suite here. As you can see, it has lots of different things it can do. Some of it is going to be limited on the free version as these things go. But what we want to do is actually set up our browser to send all its traffic through this proxy. So by default, go to the proxy tab and go to options. By default, it listens on localhost 8080. You can change that if you need to. If on my browser, it's just going to be platform specific. Like on my Mac, it wants me to do it in system settings, things like that. And if we go to preferences, so edit preferences, and should be under advanced and network. This Iceweasel is like an offshoot of Firefox, so it's similar to how Firefox is set up. And go to connection settings, manual proxy configuration, where we want localhost 8080, and use proxy configuration for all protocols. Click OK. So that should send all our traffic through Burp Suite. So if we go back to this proxy tab and intercept, make sure that intercept is on, and I'll just click enter again on this so it'll reload the page. So we should see Burp Suite light up. And it says get book service http:/1.1. So we're getting the main page of this application. So we can make changes to this, though there's not really anything we want to change here. When we're done with it, we can say forward, and that'll forward it onto the browser. So for instance, where does it have it where we can log in? Or how about, let's click login here. And forward. So get book service login.aspx. It's going to take us to a new page. And if we do new user and forward that. If I put in username georgia@bulbsecurity.com, password is a bad password. Oh well, georgia@bulbsecurity needs to be my email. I click go. It gets called, so it catches our post requests as well. So if we break it down by parameter here, we can actually see the values that are being sent. Make this a little bit bigger. So we see Georgia password and georgia@bulbsecurity.com. So if I change password to password 1, so I change it in my proxy. The server hasn't seen it yet, so every change I make in the proxy, that's what the server is going to see. So if I send this in, George's password will be password 1, regardless of the fact that originally I put in password. Alright, so now if I go to login, just turn intercept off. Once I'm done intercepting things, I can just turn it off. So if I do Georgia and password 1, make sure I put in the same password that I did through the proxy. That logs me in just fine. So proxy's nice for like seeing the raw traffic, any hidden fields, manipulating the traffic, which may come in handy for us in some cases, as we'll see. So additionally, some basic things that we can do here. If we go over to the target tab, we'll see the IP address of our Win7 system. So we can right click on that. And we're not going to be able to scan in the free version. I do like the scanners in here, but we're not going to be able to do that in the free version, so if you buy the pro version, then you can possibly scan them. But we can spider the host, try and find some more pages. Just going to send it requests and see if it finds more pages. It's basically going to click on all these links. So it should be able to find us some additional pages. We could put in the, I'll just ignore the forms. We can put in information to submit the forms to help it log in and stuff as well. There's not too much actually on the site, basically just books and a few other things. But so that's the basics on our Burp Suite. We do, of course, have the scanner, but basically it doesn't do anything in the free version, that looks like. Yeah. Burp Intruder, what this is going to do is this allows us to do password guessing and otherwise send different options automatically into web forms. We can give it like payload lists and set up different ways of doing it. Like there's different options that you can do. And things like that. But that's another one that's going to be really slowed down in this version. Decoder is always nice. Like if you're trying to decode information that's like base 64 encoded or something like that, you can just paste it in here and it'll take care of it. So even when I'm not necessarily doing web application stuff, I occasionally pull this up. There's, other things as well, like repeating the request. If you get an interesting request, just repeating it. See the results. Things like that. It can do a lot of things. The Pro version is much more powerful. So if you continue with web apps, I encourage you to buy it. So now let's actually start attacking some stuff. Look at those common web vulnerability classes. What actually happened is that it shut down because I haven't changed the power saving settings on 1.7, so that's kind of annoying, but it shut itself down. So I don't have the power cord plugged in right now for whatever reason. But once I turn it back on, it should work just fine. Sure enough, works perfectly. Alright, so no worries there. Alright, now let's take a look at file inclusion. So there's two kinds of file inclusion. Local file inclusion, which we'll see, and there's also remote file inclusion, so LFI and RFI. So remote file inclusion, as the name implies, will actually allow us to load a file from another web server, so we could load up... my spider's still going. So we could load up a file from another web server, so our web server, for instance. So if we're just doing like a request that gets a file, and it'll just allow you to get it like from http dot whatever, then you can potentially like load malicious code from another web server. It doesn't even have to be hosted on the target web server, which it can seem like, how could that possibly happen? But it can, depending on how the code goes. You can include things, for instance, in PHP from other applications just fine if you give it the path, so that's possible. But this particular app doesn't have a remote file inclusion vulnerability. It does, however, have a local file inclusion vulnerability, which will allow me to pull local files. So, take a look. We go to our newsletters. So if I go to, I was in the right place. So I'm still Mike. If I go to profile and view newsletters, and then click on this newsletter here, I'm going to turn on my burp proxy again so we can intercept it. So we can see in the parameters here, it's actually pulling this from C, inetpub, www.root, book, newsletter, mike@mike.com, webhackingreview.tech. So it gives us a full path. So this is going to allow us to actually pull any file that our web user has access to into this little window. So I'll just leave it alone for now, forward it on, and we get that right there. So we can pull other files from the web server as well as, again, anything on the file system. So if, for instance, gave it, do this again, edited this value, and set it to auth.info.xml. There is our login information. It's actually all in plain text, no less. Everybody's password in plain text, including the user I created. So Mike's password was Mike. We probably could have guessed that. So we can also pull things off the file system and get anything that we have access to as this user, basically, since we don't have root privileges on this, that we could pull. So interesting information. If we had any code on here, like an ASPX backdoor that we had gotten up some other way, we might be able to execute it even through here. But seeing the passwords isn't half bad, really. Maybe there's a place that stores credit cards. Well, there's actually not in this app, but if it was a real app, perhaps there would be. Let's look at another thing. Let's look at command execution. I'm going to intercept off. Don't need it right now. So there's actually this thing called newsletter sign up right here. So if we look at this, we saw that. Actually, let's go back for a second and look at that original view newsletters. Oops, I actually need the proxy back on. Intercept on, catch. So it's inetpub, www.root, book, newsletters, mike@mike.com. So it looks like there's actually a folder for each user that has newsletters. So my guess would be, which I obviously can be wrong, there's no requirement that developers develop things the way I think they should. But I would guess that this newsletter sign up will actually create a folder for the user that signs up. So what if I do Georgia@metasploit.com to sign up, but then in the process of creating that folder, what if I do an and? Sometimes, it just depends on the underlying technology, or like that, or and, things like that. It depends what the syntax is going to be to get the second command. If I do ipconfig, and I do output into C, inetpub, www.root, book, test.txt, I get that path from that previous vulnerability, and I do a subscribe. Seems to have worked alright. If I go to test.txt, there's the output of my command. So we can actually execute some commands on the system. Again, we're going to be limited by the user that we are, but We could do something like maybe some PowerShell that we saw in our post-exploitation section to make this a little bit cooler. Who knows? Something we could try.